I took the job because I liked the sound elevators make when a building has finally gone quiet. Most people don't notice it. During the day, an elevator is just part of the noise of a place. Doors opening, doors closing, little chimes, footsteps, office chatter, delivery carts, phones ringing in the lobby. Everything overlaps. The machine disappears into the crowd. At night, it's different. You hear the motor start a second before the car moves. You hear the cables take weight. You hear the soft rubber sigh of the doors meeting in the middle. In an empty building, those sounds carry. They seem older than they do in daylight, more mechanical, more honest. That was one of the reasons I took the night route. The other reason was simpler. I had grown tired of people watching me work. Before that, I'd been doing elevator service on daytime calls for a company that handled maintenance contracts across a few cities in the valley and along the coast. The work itself was fine. I liked tools. I liked solving small problems. I liked the mix of electrical and mechanical thinking the job required. But daytime service meant office managers hovering beside you while you opened panels. It meant building supervisors asking for estimates before you had even seen the issue. It meant apologizing to strangers for delays that had started years before you got there. Night work was quieter. Most of our night contracts were in older office buildings, medical buildings, hotels, parking structures, and a few residential towers that preferred scheduled maintenance after tenants were asleep. You got a ring of keys, a clipboard, a route sheet, and a list of small tasks to handle between closing and dawn. Door operator checks, leveling adjustments, relay cleaning, controller resets, inspection rides. The sort of work that goes more smoothly when nobody is leaning over your shoulder, asking whether the elevator is safe while you are still holding a screwdriver. I was in my early 30s then, living alone in a small rented duplex with a carport and a patch of gravel where grass never really took. I slept badly anyway, so night work didn't feel like a sacrifice. If anything, it suited the shape of my life better than daylight had. I would wake in the afternoon, make coffee, go over the route sheet, and head out just as everybody else was settling down into dinner. By the time the city began dimming its storefront signs and office towers emptied out, I was just starting my shift. There was something peaceful about that. I still think so. Most of the buildings on my route were ordinary in the best possible way. Not glamorous, not haunted-looking. Just tired structures with working lives inside them. Beige lobbies, brass directory boards, potted plants by glass doors, carpet that had been replaced in phases rather than all at once, security desks with candy dishes and old computer monitors. The kind of places people stop seeing properly after a few weeks of working there. I got to see them after the day had worn off. The building I remember most clearly was called the Wexler Building, though depending on who you asked, it was also called Wexler Tower, Wexler Plaza, or just Wexler. It stood in the older part of downtown on a block lined with banks, law offices, and a coffee shop that closed too early for my taste. 12 public floors, 1 basement, 2 passenger cars, and a freight lift at the back near the loading bay. Built in the late 20s, renovated in the 70s, patched repeatedly ever since. The lobby had black and white stone tile worn smooth in the middle from decades of shoes. There were brass trim lines around the elevator doors and a directory board with little white plastic names that slid in and out of metal channels. During the day, it was a respectable office building. At night, it had the kind of stillness old office buildings do especially well. You could smell copier toner lingering faintly in the corridors. The heat or cooling system sighed through vents behind the walls. Somewhere, usually on the lower floors, one fluorescent tube hummed a little louder than it should have. The elevators seemed to take their time then, not malfunctioning. Just thoughtful, in a way. My routine there settled quickly. I'd park in the service bay out back around 9:30, sign the maintenance book at the security desk, and talk briefly with the night guard before heading to the machine room or whichever car had been flagged on the weekly sheet. The guard was usually the same man, a broad-shouldered older fellow named Raymond, who wore sweater vests under his security blazer in winter and kept peppermints in a saucer on the desk all year round. He had worked nights in Wexler for a long time, though I never learned exactly how long. Enough that he knew the building better than some of the tenants did. Enough that he referred to certain things by names no longer found on any directory. "North Conference lights are staying on again," he'd say. Or, "The accounting people on 8 left a box by the service car." Or, "Car 2 is hesitating at 10, same as last Thursday." I liked starting the shift with him. The lobby would be mostly empty by then, just polished stone, desk lamp light, and the muted glow from the elevator indicators above the doors. We'd exchange the usual small talk, and then I'd take one car out of normal service and begin the first inspection ride. Those inspection rides were among my favorite parts of the job. If you've never done elevator maintenance, one of the simplest ways to get a feel for a car is just to ride it over and over while listening. You watch how it levels. You feel whether it slows evenly. You listen for door rollers, relay chatter, cable noise, brake lag, anything just slightly out of rhythm. Most buildings have their own little quirks. A hard stop between 5 and 6, a shudder when the door operator warms up, a slight delay on an older call button line. Once you learn a building, you can feel when something is off before the tenant complaints stack up enough to describe it in the wrong language. Wexler's passenger cars were old enough to be interesting, and modern enough to still do their jobs most of the time. Car 1 was steadier. Car 2 was moodier. That was how Raymond put it, and he wasn't wrong. Car 1 rode smooth, but slow. Car 2 ran a little faster, and had a habit of door hesitation around floor 10 if the weather changed suddenly. Not enough to scare anybody, just enough to generate comments in the tenant logs. Doors lingered. Small jolt at arrival. Car took longer than usual from lobby. The usual things office workers notice when a machine interrupts the shape of their day. I first became aware of the extra floor because of a call light that should not have existed. It was a Tuesday in late November, cool outside, clear enough that the downtown lights looked sharp-edged against the sky. I had finished a door adjustment on Car 1 and switched over to Car 2 for a test ride because the controller log had shown an unexplained stop event between 9 and 10 the night before. That kind of thing was usually a sensor fault. Leveling issue. Dirty contact. Something small. I rode from the lobby to 12, then back down, then up again. Everything felt normal. On the 4th pass, just after midnight, I noticed the car seemed to slow between 9 and 10, though no hall call was registered. Not enough to stop. Just enough for the motor tone to change. I looked at the panel. The button lights showed lobby, 7, and 10 already cleared. Nothing new. The floor indicator above the door read 9, then went blank for half a beat, then changed to 10. I remember that blank moment very clearly. It wasn't a flicker like a bulb dying. It was more like the indicator had considered showing something else and decided not to. I made a note of it on the clipboard. Then I ran the car again. Nothing. That might have been the end of it, if not for the service log from the next week. A tenant from floor 11 had written that the elevator had opened on the wrong floor for a second, and then shut again. Another said Car 2 had stopped somewhere that smelled like old paper and floor polish, though no one got on. People write odd things when elevators act up. If you work around them long enough, you stop giving too much weight to phrasing. A door delay becomes stuck. A leveling issue becomes dropped suddenly. warm electrical smell becomes burning. So I went back on the next scheduled night and did a proper inspection. Same routine. Raymond in the lobby, Peppermint in the saucer, building almost fully asleep by 10. "This the one with the mystery stop?" he asked when he handed me the maintenance key. "Probably just a dirty sensor," I said. He nodded, but not like he agreed. More like he had heard the answer and accepted that I needed to say it. That night, on the 6th test ride, Car 2 stopped. Not roughly, smoothly. It happened between 9 and 10 again. The car slowed, settled, and the doors opened. I was still inside with the inspection key in my hand. The corridor beyond was lit. That was the first thing I noticed. Not brightly. Office building brightly. Overhead lights spaced at intervals, enough to show beige carpet, a cream-colored wall, and a narrow reception desk with a dead-potted plant on it. There was no window, no stair sign visible from where I stood, and no directory plaque beside the elevator. Just a corridor that looked, in every ordinary sense, like it belonged in Wexler, and yet didn't belong between any two floors I knew. I did not step out, mostly because I was surprised, but partly because mechanics get trained early not to trust a car stopped where it shouldn't be. If something is off in the leveling or selector system, the worst thing you can do is stroll out casually like you're on a normal landing. I leaned slightly forward and looked left. More corridor. Closed office doors. Soft yellow light. Then the doors closed again. The car rose to 10 as if nothing unusual had happened. I stood there with my hand still on the inspection panel and listened to the motor settle. When I got to 10, I stepped out and compared the corridor. It wasn't the same. 10 had blue carpet runners, framed prints of boats, and a little side table under the fire map. The place between 9 and 10 had none of that. It felt older somehow. Lower ceiling, simpler trim, no modern signage. I took the stairs down and checked 9. Also, not the same. 9 had gray walls and a copier alcove near the elevator bank. No reception desk. No dead plant. By the time I got back to the lobby, I had convinced myself there was an explanation involving misleveling, partial door opening, and my own assumptions. Buildings look different when you catch them at odd angles. If a car opens 6 inches off level, and you're half expecting a mechanical fault, the mind can build out the rest quicker than you think. That was the explanation I gave Raymond when he asked how it looked. He listened, nodded, and said, "You didn't get out, did you?" I told him no. "Good," he said, and went back to his crossword. That response bothered me more than the stop itself. Not because it confirmed anything supernatural, just because it suggested I was walking into a workplace habit nobody had thought to brief me on properly. I asked him whether the building had some kind of old mezzanine or sealed file level between 9 and 10. He shrugged. "Not on the maps." That was the first time anyone said it that plainly. Not on the maps. Naturally, I checked. A few nights later, when the route was light and I had time before another call, I went through the public building plans in the management office. Fire evacuation diagrams, leasing maps, emergency procedures. Framed copy of the floor stack in the chief engineer's binder. 12 floors, clearly listed. Basement, lobby, 2 through 12. No 13th, but plenty of buildings skip 13. That wasn't remarkable. What was remarkable was the amount of vertical space between 9 and 10 in the old sectional drawing compared with the listed ceiling heights elsewhere. It was slight, but once I noticed it, I couldn't quite unsee it. I checked the city permit copies Raymond kept in a cabinet behind the desk. Same thing. Renovation permits, electrical upgrades, facade work, elevator modernization from the late 70s. No mention of an intermediate floor. No inserted mezzanine. No disused records level. I even walked across the street during a break and looked up at the building's window lines. Counted slowly. Lobby band. Floors 2 through 9. Then a darker band of narrower windows I had never really noticed before. Then 10 through 12. They could have belonged to a mechanical chase, or decorative exterior rhythm, or nothing meaningful at all. But once I counted them, the building looked subtly wrong, in a way it never had before. That was how the pattern developed. Not in shocks, in accumulated small recognitions. Car 2 would hesitate between 9 and 10 on certain nights, usually after midnight, usually when the building was very still. Sometimes the indicator blanked for that same half-beat. Once, when I had the controller cabinet open, I found an old service sticker from a modernization company I'd never heard of. Under the handwritten list of serviced stops, there was a faded pencil mark between 9 and 10. Not a number, just a dash. I showed it to one of the senior techs at the shop, a man named Howard who had been working elevators since before I was born. He squinted at it, handed it back, and said, "You don't want to go creating floors with your eyes." That annoyed me a little. "I'm not creating anything." "I know," he said. "That's the trouble." Then he went back to whatever motor brake issue he had been looking at. That was the closest thing to advice I got from anyone in the trade. The oddest part, as the months went on, was how little this interfered with the rest of the job. Wexler remained a normal building 99% of the time. Tenants still complained about slow door closing on 1. The freight lift still made a hard thunk at basement level in damp weather. People still left disposable coffee cups in the passenger car corners, no matter how many signs management printed. My route stayed ordinary, and because it stayed ordinary, the extra floor worked its way into my thinking, not as a threat, but as a fact I had not yet named properly. Then came the paper. I found it during a pit inspection in January. The weather had turned wet that week, and Wexler's basement sump alarm had acted up, so I was checking the lower equipment along with the usual route. Elevator pits collect the strangest things over time. Dust, screws, broken pen caps, bits of old gasket, sometimes coins that slip through thresholds or receipts blown under door gap and carried down by air movement. In Car 2's pit, caught against one corner near the buffer spring, there was a rectangle of glossy paper folded once. I picked it up, mostly because you clear debris when you see it. It was a photograph. Not the sort of print you get now. An older office snapshot, slightly yellowed around the edges. It showed a reception desk, a dead potted plant, and a brass directory plaque on a wall behind it. The plaque read, "Claims Records /Suite 950." There was no Suite 950 in Wexler. There had never been a floor called 950 on any current directory. But the reception desk was the same one between 9 and 10. I know memory can lie in retrospect. It can smooth edges and convince you that a desk in a dim corridor matched a photograph found later. But I am certain enough of that image to say it plainly. It was the same desk, same angle of the counter, same dead-looking plant with drooping leaves gone pale in the flash. I took the photograph home and put it in my kitchen drawer beside a packet of spare fuses and a takeout menu. Not because I was hiding it exactly. I just didn't know who I would show it to that wouldn't immediately reduce it to either superstition or nonsense. The next time I was at Wexler, I asked Raymond whether he had ever heard of claims records. He was filling out the visitor sheet for a cleaning contractor and didn't look up at first. "Old tenant," he said. "On what floor?" He took his time answering. "Not on the board anymore." "That's not what I asked." Now he looked up. "Middle level," he said quietly. "Back before my time. And before yours, too. Middle between what? He gave me the sort of patient expression older men reserve for questions they believe have already been answered as far as wisdom allows. 9 and 10, I suppose. I waited. He continued, still in that same mild voice. Building had a records department up there once. Paper files, insurance claims, storage and clerks. Not public-facing. Most people coming through the lobby wouldn't have known it was there. What happened to it? He shook his head once. Fire, maybe. Flood, maybe. Some kind of closure. Different stories depending who's telling it. Before the modernization, they changed the elevator controls, and after that, the floor was supposed to be out of service. Supposed to be? He looked past me toward car 2. Building doesn't always care for paperwork. That was the most direct thing he ever said about it. I would like to tell you I left it alone after that. I didn't. Curiosity grew, but it wasn't hot curiosity, not recklessness, more the sort that comes from repeated contact with a small impossibility that continues behaving politely enough for you to stand near it. I started timing the pauses between 9 and 10. I started comparing weather. I started riding car 2 more often than the work strictly required. If I had a half-hour free at Wexler, I'd take the car through a few extra runs, listening for that subtle change in motor tone and watching the indicator for the blank half-beat. It did not happen every night. That would have been easier. Instead, it happened only often enough to keep me from settling around it. Sometimes, the car would stop there once, and not again for 2 weeks. Sometimes it would merely hesitate. Once, after a rainy Monday, the controller log showed 2 unscheduled stop events between 9 and 10, even though no service key had been used, and the building was supposed to be empty after 11. More than once, tenants left small notes in the complaint binder that made me pause longer than they should have. Car opened on office floor with no sign. Thought maybe wrong building for a second. Stopped at odd level. Smelled like paper dust. Please check panel. Indicator skipped. There was one note from an attorney on 12 that I still remember clearly because of how calmly it was written. Elevator opened briefly on what appeared to be an occupied corridor, not listed in the building. Woman at desk looked up. Doors shut before I could say anything. That was the only tenant complaint that ever mentioned another person. Management clipped that page out before the next week's binder review. I know, because I looked for it again, and found the staple marks. By early spring, I had worked Wexler long enough that the building felt almost domestic to me. I knew which lobby tiles clicked under certain shoes. I knew the smell of the basement after rain. I knew the machine room heat in summer, and its dry stillness in winter. I knew the dust line on the controller cabinets and the low amber light over Raymond's desk after midnight. And because I knew the building so well, the gap in it became more intimate. That was the state the floor started to feel less like a technical oddity and more like an unanswered part of the building's life. Not exactly dangerous, but unresolved. The real escalation began with a service call that should not have been routed to me. It came through on a Thursday, just before 1 in the morning while I was working another building across town. The dispatcher radioed that Wexler had an after-hours trap on car 2 between 9 and 10. Passenger reported safe, but unable to reach listed floor. Night guard requesting urgent assist. That was unusual enough to make me sit up straighter. Traps happen, of course. People panic, press buttons, hold doors, overload cars, and sooner or later somebody gets stuck. But the phrasing on that one was odd. Unable to reach listed floor. Not stuck between. Not doors won't open. Not car won't move. Just unable to reach. I drove over. By the time I reached Wexler, the streets were almost empty and damp from earlier rain. Raymond was waiting at the service entrance, looking tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "There's no one in it now," he said as I came in with the toolbox. "Dispatcher said trap." "That's what the call said." "Who called it in?" He hesitated. "From the car phone." I said nothing for a moment. Car phones existed in older elevator cars as emergency lines, yes, but they were wired to central monitoring, not directly to building security unless someone transferred the call. "What did they say?" Raymond rubbed a hand over his jaw. Woman's voice. Calm. Said she'd been trying to get to 10 and kept arriving nowhere on the directory. Asked if the records office was still open. By the time I got down here and took the car out of service, there was nobody inside. I looked at car 2. The doors were closed, indicator at lobby, no alarm. "Did you ride it?" "No." "Why not?" He gave me a tired glance. "I'm old enough to leave certain jobs to the mechanic." It was a fair answer. I put the car on independent service and took it up alone. Lobby to 5. 5 to 10. 10 to 12. Normal. No hesitation. Then, on the down run from 12, it happened again. The blank half-beat after 9, the soft settling, the doors opening. This time the corridor beyond was a little brighter. Same beige carpet, same reception desk, same cream walls. But farther back I could see a row of file cabinets, a water cooler, and a framed print hung crookedly near a closed office door. There was a desk lamp on somewhere beyond the reception counter, casting a low amber pool on the carpet. And I heard something I had not heard before. Typing. Not frantic. Not eerie in the way movies want typing to sound. Just the practical, irregular clatter of someone working at a keyboard in another room. I stayed in the car. Then, softly, from deeper in the corridor, a phone rang. Once. Twice. No one answered. The doors closed again. At 10, I stepped out, set my toolbox down, and stood in the corridor listening to my own breathing. That was the first time I felt the full weight of a choice. Because up until then, caution had been easy. Don't get out when the car stops somewhere wrong. Don't go treating a selector fault like a sightseeing opportunity. Don't confuse curiosity for technical responsibility. But a calm office corridor with typing in it is harder to dismiss than an empty landing. It invites a different kind of mistake. It makes you want to verify, to explain, to place. I rode the car down and told Raymond I had not fixed anything yet, but wanted the old building records if he could get to them. He gave me a long look. "Tonight?" "No," I said. "Soon." He nodded and went to unlock a file cabinet in the rear office. A week later, he had a cardboard file box waiting for me under the desk. Old leasing scraps, fire inspection notes, typed correspondence with carbon copies still pink at the edges, photos of lobby renovations, a tenant directory booklet from 1976, and in that booklet, between floors 9 and 10, a listing that had been covered over in later revisions, but was still visible if you tilted the page toward the light. 9M. Wexler Claims Storage and Records. Not a full floor number. Not 10. Not 9. 9M. That seemed almost laughably simple after all the uncertainty. A middle level. Mezzanine, maybe. Records floor. Something half administrative and easy to remove from public consciousness once the filing systems changed and office towers modernized. Except that none of the fire plans listed it. None of the city permit copies did. The current building maps omitted it entirely. And more than that, the elevator modernization documents included a typed note on one layer page. Intermediate stop disabled. Car programming revised. Access to restricted level removed from all public controls. Removed from all public controls. Which meant, at one point, it had been real enough to disable. I should have been relieved by that. Instead, I became more unsettled. Because the document solved only the least interesting part of the problem. Yes, there had been a floor once. Fine. Buildings change, offices close, access gets sealed, records vanish into storage or get hauled away in boxes. But that did not explain the lit corridor. It did not explain the calm typing. It did not explain the woman calling from the emergency phone, asking whether the records office was still open. The controlled climax, if I can call it that, came in July during a heat wave. Old buildings behave differently in heat. Doors swell, controllers run warmer, relay cabinets smell faintly metallic by midnight. Tenants complain more because the air. We had 3 service calls stacked that week from Wexler alone. Door bounce on 1, leveling drift on 2, and freight car close timer issues in the basement. I was there after 11 doing a longer controller check because daytime service would have been too disruptive. Raymond was off that night, replaced by a younger guard named Leon, who mostly watched sports highlights at low volume behind the desk and knew less about the building than he thought he did. The lobby felt emptier without Raymond in it, less supervised somehow. The tower above us had gone dark floor by floor until only a law office on 12 still showed a light under the door. Around 12:40, while I was in the machine room checking selector contacts, Car 2 registered an unscheduled car call from the disabled mid-level. I saw it in the service display. That should not have been possible. The controller screen, small and old but still functional, showed a stop command from a position line between 9 and 10. Not hall call, car call. From inside the car. I stared at it long enough to be sure I was reading it correctly. Then I took the stairs down to the lobby and found Car 2 sitting closed and quiet at lobby level. No one inside. Leon looked up from the desk and said, "Somebody just took that a minute ago." I turned to him. "Who?" He shrugged. "Lady in a gray skirt suit. Thought she was with one of the firms upstairs." My whole body went still in a very calm way. "Did you see what floor she pressed?" "No. She walked straight in. Didn't even look at me." That, more than anything else, made the building feel suddenly inhabited by a conversation I was not prepared to join. I stepped into Car 2 and put it on independent. Then I wrote it up. 9. Blank half beat. Stop. Doors open. The corridor beyond looked exactly as before, except this time there was a woman standing at the reception desk with one hand on a folder, as if she had just paused in the middle of turning away. Gray skirt suit, hair pinned up, nothing theatrical about her. She looked like any office worker leaving a late shift in an old building, a little tired, a little distracted, prepared to be polite if stopped. She looked at me, not startled, just mildly surprised. "Is it very late?" she asked. That was the entire question. I did not answer immediately, and in that second, I understood something that had been pressing at the edges of all the earlier encounters. The people on that floor did not feel lost. They felt delayed, as if the building had held them in an unfinished part of the evening, and they were continuing within it, waiting for the rest of the structure to catch up. "It's after midnight," I said finally. She nodded once, as if that confirmed something. "Oh," she said. "Then they've gone." I did not ask who. I did not step out. Behind her, farther down the corridor, I could see office doors with frosted glass, one of them lettered in gold paint with records beneath flaking stripes. A wall clock over the reception desk read 8:17 and did not move. The woman adjusted the folder in her hand. "Could you send the car back down?" she asked. "They'll be locking the lobby." I don't know why that question unsettled me more than anything else. Maybe because it was so courteous, so normal. Maybe because for a second I had the foolish, powerful urge to say yes. Instead, I heard myself answer the only honest thing available. "The lobby's still open." She looked at me a moment longer than politeness required. Then, from somewhere deep in the floor, I heard a metal file drawer slam shut. Not hard, just decisively. The woman turned her head slightly toward the sound. When she looked back at me, her expression had changed only in the faintest way. Not angry, not even disappointed. Just farther off. "I think you should go," she said. The doors closed. The car descended to lobby. I stood inside it the entire way, with my hand resting on the service key, and my pulse so calm it frightened me a little afterward. Because calm, in moments like that, is not always comfort. Sometimes it is the body deciding that steadiness is more useful than fear. In the lobby, Leon asked whether I'd found the issue. I told him Car 2 would be shut down for the night pending inspection. That was partly true. I took the car out of service completely, posted a maintenance placard, and spent the next hour going through checks I had no hope of making relevant to what I had just seen. Door operator, controller reset, call circuit, selector verification. It was busy work, mostly. Mechanical hands searching for mechanical causes, because that is what they knew how to do. At 3 a.m, while I was closing the machine room, the controller log printed one final event on its own. Return complete. No call source, no timestamp aligned with any registered run. Just that phrase in the little green service text. I tore off the printout and put it in my pocket. That was the last night I ever rode Car 2 alone after midnight. The aftermath, outwardly, was dull. That's often how these things are. I filed a restricted operation note recommending Car 2 be removed from normal night service pending modernization review. The company, which had no interest in strange stories and every interest in liability, approved the recommendation because it coincided with existing complaints about leveling drift and after-hours stop errors. Management at Wexler agreed because having one passenger car at night was cheaper than acknowledging mysterious controller behavior in writing. Within a month, Car 2's controller package was partially upgraded. The selector assembly was changed, the service display replaced, and some old stop logic was stripped out. Not everything. The building never had money for full modernization, but enough that the blank half beat between 9 and 10 stopped showing in the obvious way. Or mostly stopped. I still serviced the building for another year. During that time, Car 2 behaved better. No more emergency phone calls from nowhere. No more clear opening onto the middle corridor while I was inside. The tenants stopped writing notes about wrong floors. Raymond returned from leave and never once asked me directly what I had seen that summer night, though he looked at me differently after it. Not with pity, more like quiet recognition, the kind workers exchange when something unhelpfully hard to describe has become part of the shared understanding. Once, late in winter, he slid a paper cup of coffee toward me and said, "They moved most of the files out in '82, you know." Most? That's what the engineer then wrote. We sat with that a moment. Then he added, "Some levels close slower than others." That was as near to philosophy as he ever came. Eventually, Wexler changed hands. The new owners gutted the lobby, brightened the lights, replaced the directory, and put an expensive glass security desk where Raymond's old station had been. Raymond retired around the same time. Car 2 got a cleaner panel and softer chimes. They removed the brass trim and replaced half the tile with polished stone that looked too new for the rest of the building. If you walked in now, you might not notice anything older than the '80s. But if you stand across the street and look up, really look up, you can still count the windows. That darker band is still there between 9 and 10. narrower than the others, easy to miss if you are hurrying. I left elevator service a few years later for reasons that had nothing to do with Wexler. Better pay, better hours, knees and shoulders that wanted a different future. Now and then I still ride old office elevators for ordinary reasons: medical appointments, meetings, parking structures, county records. And every so often, one of them will pause just a shade too long between floors. Not enough that anyone else in the car notices. Just enough that I hear the motor change tone and feel the machine thinking. When that happens, I never look directly at the indicator. That is my one superstition from those years. Not because I think every old building has an extra floor in it. Only because I know at least one did, and probably still does, whether the current maps admit it or not. Sometimes I think about the woman in the gray suit more than the floor itself. Not in a frightened way. In the way you think about somebody you met briefly in a place where the rules of time were not quite shared. She had a folder in her hand. She was still at her desk, in some sense, long after the building had moved on from the work that once kept that level alive. She was not wandering, not hunting, just delayed in a part of the evening that had not fully ended. There is something sad about that. There is also something that feels, despite everything, professional. Maybe that is why the memory stayed with me the way it did. Because for all its strangeness, the floor never felt theatrical. It felt administrative. File drawers, desk lamps, paper dust. The soft, late office politeness of people working too long and expecting the lobby to lock before they reach it. If I had to put it plainly, I would say this. Most buildings are larger than their blueprints. Not physically, at least not in the way surveyors mean. But in habit, in accumulated use, in all the repeated motions that happen inside them until a structure begins to anticipate certain hours and hold certain routines longer than it should. I think elevators, more than most machines, are sensitive to that. They spend their whole lives translating human intention into vertical motion, up for lunch, down for smoke break, up for meetings, down to catch the last train, over and over, year after year, until maybe the cables remember a little more than the schematics do. I can't prove that. I can only tell you what happened. And I can tell you one other thing too. A few years after I left the trade, I was in another city for a conference I had no real desire to attend. The hotel was attached to an older office tower that had been converted upstairs. And one night around 11, I took the elevator down alone to get ice. The car was nearly empty, except for a woman in business clothes holding a folder against her chest. She stood beside me in the easy silence strangers share late at night in buildings. The indicator showed 12, 11, 10. Then it blanked for half a beat between numbers. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. I turned my head slightly toward the woman, not enough to stare, just enough to see her expression. She was already looking at the doors, calm, tired, waiting. The car did not stop. It went on down to the lobby like nothing at all had happened. When the doors opened, she did not get out. I did. And as they closed behind me, I heard her say, very softly, to no one I could see, "I'm sorry. I thought this one still went there." I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. Not because it frightened me. Because it suggested, in the most ordinary way possible, that whatever happened at Wexler wasn't unique to Wexler. Maybe some floors vanish from maps without ever quite vanishing from the machinery that used to serve them. Maybe some elevators keep trying, out of old instruction or older habit, to honor calls that were never fully canceled. I don't know. But if you ever find yourself alone in an old building late at night, and the elevator pauses a little too long between one floor and the next. Listen carefully before you move. Sometimes, a machine is just deciding where you meant to go. And sometimes it's remembering somewhere that used to be on the route.